Hello everyone, today we're going to be setting up a Ruby on Rails website running on DigitalOcean. Inside of that website we're going to have a Godot game. Now this website itself is pretty simple. It effectively just runs Tailwind, has some user accounts and admin functionality, a little development blog if you want to play with it. Let's go ahead and let's just test it out. I'm going to go ahead and log in. The login page isn't styled, it's mostly just a tech demo. Usual device stuff here with the user accounts. We log in with an admin account. We'll see here I'm an admin user, which allows me to create a post. If I log in as a regular user, I don't see this create post button. I can click this and say, hello, this is my blog or something, I don't know. And then we can come down here. Maybe we attach an image if we want to into our dev blog. Let's go over to pictures and let's just grab, I don't know, a picture of a cat. Upload the cat. You can give it a caption if you want to. Add a caption. Percy is a cat. I'm not going to say he's a good cat because sometimes he does get into trouble. And then we'll click create post. Do this. Wait a second. Refresh. Not necessary. It'll automatically do it. And then here's your cat picture. So we'll go back to our posts. See here, we have this in our post list. And again, this is on deanout.com. So this is like live right now. We can see the author. This is an optional field. And then we can go back to the home page. On the home page, we also have this play our game button. If we click on this, we'll go ahead and we'll launch a Soulslike game. Now you are going to need like hardware acceleration turned on in your browser to make sure this works okay, or you're going to want to use something like Edge, I think. Now this is very loud. Unfortunately, I don't really have a way to balance the audio, but yeah, it's basically just a whole game you can play around with in your browser. It's super happy for me to be doing all this while I'm recording. But you get the idea. So we have like this whole game here running. So let's take a look at how to actually do this. There's also like combat and other stuff, but it's not really the point. Before we get started, I just want to say this whole thing was streamed over on twitch.tv/deanout, where we went through the entire process of problem solving hosting this application this way. We tried to streamline it as much as possible, but the whole thing happened live over the span of 2 streams, probably like 8 hours total. So if you want to see what the whole process is like for building these videos, where instead of 40 minutes that you see 8 hours worth of troubleshooting, feel free to come stop by. To do this, we're going to be using Cloudflare to point to a DigitalOcean server. We're going to be using DigitalOcean itself, and then we're going to be using Kamal to deploy this. So the actual web aspect of it is going to be very simple. So I'm going to go ahead and delete the server. We don't need the server anymore. Let's destroy this droplet. Get rid of it. Godot demo, destroy. There you go. We'll then come up here and click create to create a droplet. I do have an affiliate link. This will give you 2 months of hosting credits. So for 2 months, you'll have like $200 worth of credits. And then afterwards, if you spend $25, they gift me $25 as well. So I have a link to this in the video description. It helps me out, and hopefully it helps you create this without incurring expenses. So if we come over here, we're going to go over to New York, choose that as a data center. The version doesn't matter. I'm just going to go with Ubuntu 23.1, sure. Go over to regular, and I'm going to go with a $6 a month droplet. That's the cheapest option we can go with. I'll add an SSH key, and then I'll scroll down here, and I'll just call this Godot-video, and then we'll click create droplet. Next step, we're going to come into our console here, and I'm just going to check to make sure I'm using, the right version of Ruby, which I'm not, so I'm going to have to chruby, ruby-3.2.2, and then we're going to do a Rails new, I'm going to call it video, and I'm going to pass a -c of Tailwind. Go ahead and run that. And that's effectively how we add Tailwind to our project. We just run a Rails new, we pass in the flag, it'll add it, and it gives us some of those default stylings that we don't normally get. Now, the other thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go over to Docker Hub, and it's going to be in our Docker Hub account. After you log in, you can go over to security, and then you'll have a area for access tokens. I'm going to delete this access token just so that we can see how this works. This is basically a password, but because it's not an actual password to your account, you can revoke those tokens and still maintain access to your account. So if this ever gets compromised, you don't have to worry about it. I'm going to call it Godot-video. Click generate. That's going to give us a key here that we need to use. Also tells us that our username is Deanin in this case. Yours will obviously be different, but that's good to know too. So let's cd into our video. And we'll run a code dot to open this up in VS Code. And now if you don't have Kamal installed, you're going to run a gem install Kamal like that, but I already have it, so I don't have to do that. And then I'm going to move this over here. I'm going to trust all authors, trust the authors, blah, 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 nobody cares. And then I'm going to resize this. Okay, so now that we have this, let's do a Kamal init. This will generate 3 files for us, a deploy, an env, and a place for hooks. We're not going to worry about hooks, so we just worry about these 2. So we'll open up the env file. First step is this Rails master key. Come into config master.key and just copy this. Then paste this in after the equal sign. There's your master key done. For our access token, we'll copy it, come in here to our registry, paste it in, save it, and then we can close this. There you go, env file already configured. For the deploy, we have to do a couple things. I'm gonna get rid of these comments because you're not here to read comments. You're here for me to actually explain how this stuff works. So first things first, service name. I'm just gonna name mine Deanout because that's the name of my domain name. I'm also gonna blow up the font size a bit so you can actually read what I'm doing. Image, it's my Docker username / whatever I want to call it. In this case, I'm going to call it Godot-video, just like that. Next, we have the server block. We're going to change this a little bit for our servers. Paste it in. I'll explain it as well. Instead of just doing servers with the IP, I'm going to create a role for our web, and then I'm going to give it a host block where I pass in the IP address. In this case, we have a new IP address here. So I'm going to wait for this. I'm going to copy the new IP address, and I'm going to paste that in. There's my server's IP. For Trafic, this is our reverse proxy. So similar to Nginx, we're using a reverse proxy, but here we're using Trafic. After the dot, you're going to replace this first bit with your service name. Then you're going to have _secure .entrypoints.rule.tls. Web secure inside of your host, this is your domain name, so replace Deanout with whatever you want. And then for TLS, just set that to true. After that, we have our registry. Again, I'm going to shrink this so it's a bit easier to see. We just have a username, which is our Docker Hub registry username, which is going to match whatever's up here for the image. And then we have our password, which we're grabbing from our env file. That's our environment variable. Speaking of environment variables, we need our Rails master key. So we grab that from our secret in our env. Then we're going to do a Trafic config right here. Trafic options, we're publishing to 443.443 because we're using SSL. This is going to be a secure, so we're going to have HTTPS. And for our args, entry points, web secure address, we're going to say 443. Finally, for the volume, we're just going to make a volume for storage. This allows us to, when we push up updates, our SQLite database gets put on our actual physical server. And then we can destroy the Docker container, which is this stuff. But because it's backed up to our storage, when we create a new Docker container, this will get created and then it'll be able to pull out of the storage file that's on the actual server so that it can persist that data. Otherwise, every time you uploaded something new, your entire database would go away. And then we're done here. This is effectively it for our Kamal stuff. And to prove that, I'm going to hit PWD to copy this. And then I'm going to hit Control-Shift-T. Actually, I'm not going to hit Control-Shift-T. I'm going to open up specifically this Ubuntu 22.04. And then I'm going to CD into that directory. Now, we're going to be doing some local development, but I want to deploy this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say Kamal setup. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter there. This is going to run. It is going to run into an error. I'll show you how to fix that. It's only an error, I think, that I'm going to run into. You might, in which case we'll address it together. But it's probably just an error I'm going to run into. Anyways, we're going to come over here while that's running, and we're just going to actually develop our application. Because right now, if I run a bin/dev, and then we go over to localhost port 3000. Oops, that's the wrong one. We're going to go over to localhost port 3000. We have a Rails app, but we don't have anything else. So let's start by generating a controller for our homepage. So we'll say Rails G controller, pages, home. There's our homepage controller, just like that. Next, we want to generate our blog post, because remember, we had all those blog posts to work with. So, and I'm going to move this over here so I can monitor this while I'm talking. Because unfortunately, this has a tendency to not work too well. At least for my setup, because again, I'm doing this while I'm recording. I'm messing with a bunch of stuff. But we can always monitor it because we will have a Docker container running here that's doing our building for us, because it does the build process locally on our own container. So we can at least see that that's running. We know that's working. But okay, what we need to do is, first of all, if you run into the error that I'm going to run into, we need to add a platform. In my case, I need to add Arch64. Again, I would just wait for the Kamal command to work for you. In my case, I know this is going to be an issue, so I'm going to add this to my bundle. This is just going to tell my bundle, hey, you're going to need this. Then we're going to add devise. So I'm going to say bundle add devise. This is for user accounts. I want to make admin users and all that other stuff, so I'm going to go ahead and do this. That'll give us our user account generation and functionality. I'm going to do a Rails G devise :install. You can always look up the devise documentation online. Just look up devise gem. You'll find the README. Tells you everything you need to know about using devise. You can also find other tutorials specifically on devise. But then we need to generate our actual users. So I'm going to say Rails G devise, and I'm going to call them users. You can call them whatever you want to. You want to call them players, you can call them players. Just anytime you use the word users, then you would instead have to use the word player. Okay, now that we have that, let's do a scaffold for our post. Let's say the post has a title and it has a user : references, because I want this to belong to a user. So I'm going to say it references a user. Just like that. Boom. Now you might wonder where the body is, because I only give it a title and a user. Well, we're going to use action text for the body, because remember we had that ability to like bold our text and add attachments and all of other stuff. In that case, what we want to do is do a Rails G action _ text : install, just like this, because we're trying to add like as many features as I think you would probably want to test initially, so that you get like the whole breadth of the experience here. So we have that. Now let's go ahead and let's set it up. So we'll come into our app models user.rb. In our user.rb, we need to say this has rich text, _ text. I'm gonna call it body. That's the name of our content now, is our body. We can then come over to our app controllers, post controller, scroll down to the bottom. Instead of a user ID here, we probably want to just do body. And then we'll come up to our create. In our create, we're going to assume the user is logged in. So I'm going to say app post.user equals current user, because current user is the user that's currently logged in. Okay, and we can see here I ran into an issue where it tells me I need to have a supported platform. So I'm going to go ahead and just run my Kamal setup again, and that'll work just fine for me. In your case, this might still be running. Totally fine. You love to see it if it's still running. But okay, current user right here, we're setting that, and then we're pretty much done in this controller. The only other thing we want to do is we want to make sure that our user's logged in if they're trying to do anything except for see all of our posts or see one of our posts in particular. So in that case, we need to add a check here. I'm just going to come over here and open up my notes so that I can copy and paste this. So you don't have to see me type it. We're going to add a before action here to authenticate the user with a bang, except for the index and the show. So if the user tries to go anywhere except for the index and show, like maybe create a post, they have to be logged in. Also, we're going to use authorize admin only for new, create, edit, update, and destroy. This doesn't exist yet, so we have to actually create this. So let's come over to our controllers, application controller. In our application controller, we want to create this authorize admin. This will just be usable in the rest of our application. What we're going to do is we're going to redirect to the root path with an alert that says access denied unless the current user exists, which is what this ampersand means. So if the current user does exist, if we're currently logged in, then we call .admin ? Now what is this .admin ? Well, we're going to add the admin bit to our user model. So let's come into our user model real quick. In our user model, we have this rich text body. We also want to say that this has many posts because posts are going to belong to a user. Then we're going to create a role for our users. So we're going to say, here's an enum for a role. A user can either be a user or a user can be an admin. Those are our two roles. Then, because, we might not have a default role set, we'll say after initialize, set the default role if this is a new record. What's set default role? Well, it's a function we define right here. You just say self.role is equal to user, or it's equal to whatever you have it set to. If it's not equal, or if it's not set to anything, then we just set it to user. So that's our default. And now we're done in our user.rb. But where are we storing this role? Because we haven't actually added this to our users yet. Well, for that, we're going to do a migration. We're going to say Rails G migration, add role to user, role. And because we don't have anything here, it's the same thing as saying : string. It's just implied that it's a string in this case. Let's come into our DB, our migrate, this last migration here. Make sure this is okay. Looks good to me. And then we can do a DB : migrate, just like that. All of our tables are created then. Looks good. Now, if we try to run this, we're going to run into potentially two different issues. If I run a bin/dev, it might work for me. It might not work for you. The reason why is in our gem file, if we come over here and scroll all the way down in our gem file, we're going to have a gem in here that gets uncommented whenever we do action text. It's this image processing gem. The image processing gem, make sure it's uncommented, and then you're going to run a bundle install just to install it. The other thing you need to do is you need to do a sudo apt get install for libvips if you don't have it already. This is what allows a lot of the image processing to run on the actual server. You won't need this because in our Docker file, this is already created for us. We already have a libvips in here, right here, in this sudo apt get install where it's doing libvips. But on our local machine, we don't have that. Because I'm running this locally, I just need to make sure this is installed. So run this if you haven't already. Otherwise, your action text won't show any images when you upload them. Okay, now that we have all of that, let's go ahead and let's start our server. Let's go to localhost port 3000, and you'll see nothing changes. Well, that's because we need to actually come into our config in our routes.rb. We need to give this a root path. We'll say the root path is going to be this pages controller. Oops, I don't know what happened here. This needs to be pages. This is going to be the home action. So pages, Octothorpe home, or pages hash home. Once you do that, you can come over here and refresh, and now we have a home page. Cool. Now we want the home page to look a little bit more interesting, right? So let's go ahead and let's do that. In our app, views, pages, homepage, we're going to style this a bit. Because we have Tailwind, all of this code will be available in the video description. I'm going to scare you a bit here, but I don't think you want to watch me type this out because it's just kind of boring in all honesty. This is what we need. We're going to create an article right here. Just encompasses everything, right? Then we do a check if the current user exists right here. This entire block section is if the user exists. So if the user is logged in, I want to show their email in an H1. If the user is an admin, I want to create a link to the new post path right here. This right here is what gives us a link to create a new post, but we could also just go to /post/new, which is why in our controller, we're actually checking only for the new create, edit, update, destroy routes if the user's an admin. So even if they go directly to that route, we're still protected. And we just give it a class of text-blue-500 because Tailwind doesn't give us default like HTML link looking colors. So we just go with that. Then we have a edit profile, which goes to edit user registration path, standard device stuff. Destroy user session path, it's just a logout button. We give it a method of delete because it's a logout button. We go on from there. Now, if the user's not logged in, which is this else block, we just say, hey, you're not logged in yet. Either create an account by going to the new user registration path or log in by going to the new user session path. Okay, now that we have all of that, what do we do now? Well, now we come in here to this section and we say this is running Godot on Rails, or it's powered by Kamal. Kamal has a link to their documentation page right here. We then create another section where we say play our game, which is going to go to a game path. Now the game path doesn't exist yet, but we'll worry about that in a second. Then down here, we finally have this dev blog, which is just read about our development here, which takes us to our post path. So let's create this game path real quick. And then after all of that, we'll talk about the Godot portion of this. So in our game path, we're going to come into our routes. Inside of our routes, what we want to do is we want to say, hey, I need a game path. We'll put that below the up and above the root. It's just going to look like this. We'll say get game, which is going to go to the pages controller game action as game. So this is just going to be game_path when we want to use this. So in our homepage, we use it by just using game_path in our link to. Pretty standard, but now we have to come into our pages controller where we have a home action. We have to give it a game action. Now in here, what we want to do is, and this is going to change a bit depending on what you name your game. So if you set this up in one way, you might have a redirect to a game/godot.html. The example we're going to do is going to be a Soulslike game. So we're going to use the Soulslike template, which is just what it's called. It's going to ultimately depend on whatever you do. For now, I'm just going to leave it as game/Godot or /game/Godot. Then we'll go from there. So if we come over here and we refresh the homepage, you'll now see all of these things appear. Looks just like it did in the demo. So we can say, all right, I want to, I don't know, log in or create an account. In this case, I want to log in with an admin user. So how do we create an admin user without having to like jump through hoops and do it in the terminal or in the database? Well, for that, we can come into our, our bin, our Docker entry point. In our Docker entry point, in addition to doing the DB prepare, we're going to do a bin/rails DB seed. This will run every time we do anything with Docker. It'll seed the database. Then we can come into our DB seeds right here. We can actually seed the database. So what do we want to seed it with? Well, we want to seed it with a admin user, but we only want to seed it with an admin user if that user doesn't exist yet. So we do a admin equals user.find or create by. So it either finds an admin user, in which case it'll do nothing, or it creates it by using the email of admin@example.com. So if it can't find admin@example.com, it'll create it. Otherwise, it'll just leave it like this. It says do user, and we set its password to be password. It's password confirmation because you always have to type your password in twice to make sure it's right. So we set that to password as well. Then we call user.admin, which comes from our user roles. We have the enum for a role, which gives us the ability to call user exclamation or admin exclamation to just set the user to that role. Super nice. It's just a single enum gives us all that power. So we call it user.admin exclaim or bang, whatever floats your boat. And then now this is a admin user. If you want to create more users, you don't want them to be admin, you just omit this line. They'll be user roles by default. But okay, now that's done, we can seed our database. So let's stop our server, run a Rails DB :seed. That'll run. Now we can do a bin/dev. And if we run the seed over and over again, we won't make more admin users because it'll find the user instead, and then it won't run this. Super cool stuff. We can come over to the login page, do an admin@example.com, the password of password. So we come in here, we have the ability to click on the Kamal link or the Kamal link. That'll take us to the Kamal homepage. We can go to the play our game route, which right now doesn't exist. And then we can go to the dev blog, which we'll just click on. That takes us here. We can create a new post. Because we're an admin, this works. We can say test, but you can see here we have a user form. We don't have the body. So let's fix that. Open up our side panel. I'm going to collapse everything so that we can actually see. We're going to come into app, views, posts. We're going to come into the post form. Now in this post form, what we want to do is we want to say, hey, we have rich text. I want to be able to input rich text, not just normal text. So instead of having this user ID here, what we're going to do is I'm going to replace this, but it's largely the same styling. I'm going to replace this with a form.rich text area. It's going to be for the body instead of content because I changed it for this video. Then we're going to give it a class. The class right here pretty much mirrors what's up here. You can play around with this as just Tailwind styling. Go look up a Tailwind guide if you need to. Let's come over here and let's refresh. And just like that, we now have the ability to do everything you saw in that demo. So say my first post. I'll do test case. I'll bold the case text right here. And then I'll attach an image of a cat just so that we can do this. This time I'll go with Velvet instead of Percy. Again, you can do the captions and all the other stuff. Nobody cares. I realized what we did wrong. That's my fault. Let's come into the models user. This doesn't has rich text. I don't know why I thought we put this in the user model. Probably going to get roasted for that. We need to put this in the post. The post has rich text. The user doesn't. We'll come over here. We'll refresh. We'll do a test. Test case. All right, I guess I typed my first post. We'll bold the case. We'll come down here. Oops, we'll come down here. Attach a new image. We'll use Velvet again. Just like this. Click create post. We have this post, but nothing shows up on the page. Let's come into our posts and our post partial. It's this underscore post. For this underscore post, we want to add some stuff. So what we're going to do, we have our post title. Below our post title, what we're going to do is we're going to add a block to check if the post has a user. If the post has a user, do another p tag. We'll say this is the author, and then we use post.user.email. Then we're going to create another one right here. Instead of having this user.id, we're going to do a post body, just like this, and then post.body right here. The last thing we have to do is we have to add in some checks around this if it doesn't equal show. In here, what we're going to do is we want to make sure this edit post only shows up for admin users. So we just do a check. If the current user is logged in, .admin, question mark, lets us check if they're an admin. So if they are an admin, we can just do a link to edit this post. Just like that, if we come over here and refresh, we now have title and author, body with the image. We come back to our main index page. Because this is a partial, both the show page as well as the index page are rendering the post partial. Let's go to the show page real quick. In the show page, we have another check we need to do, which is for the edit and destroy right here. For both of these, we're once again going to wrap these in a check if the current user is an admin. Just like that. Tab this over, save it, come over here, refresh the page. You can see this edit post, right? If we go to the show post button, you see all three of these buttons. But if we come over here and we open up a new tab, paste this in, users that aren't admin or aren't logged in only see back to posts. So they can't edit or destroy. But we have to do the same thing for our post index page, which is that page where we see all of our posts right here. In the post index, we once again are going to have to do a check. Make sure that the user is an admin, which is going to happen right here. It's this link to new post path. I'm just going to wrap this in a quick check to see if the user is an admin and if they're logged in, etc. Then we're good to go here. Save this, over here, refresh. All of that's working. Now, what else do we still have to do here? Well, we have effectively, we have the entire application done. You can see over here, the console is exporting because I've had to restart it because of changes that I've been running here. But we still have to do the Godot game. So how do we do that? Well, go over to Godot, search for it, go to the GodotEngine.org website, click on download latest. You're going to download the Godot engine, not the .NET version, because that one doesn't work with the web for whatever reason. Go with just regular Godot engine. And we're going to open it. We're going to go over here to just create a new project, whatever this opens. We can go over to the asset library. We can grab the Godot for Soulslike. Click on that, and then click download. It'll download this project for us. It's like 50 megabytes or something. It'll ask us for a project name. So Godot for Soulslike, whatever. And we have to go to a path for this. So I have this Rails project, or sorry, I have this Godot project, which has a Rails hosting folder. I have a demo in here. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this video. You just save it wherever you want to. In my case, I have to keep it organized so that I can do these videos. Once you create that folder, just click select current folder. We can say install and edit, and that'll work just fine for us. Because we're doing this as an HTML5 game, we have to come into our editor. Assuming Godot wants to work, we have to come into our editor. We're going to go to manage export templates. We're going to download and install whatever we need to. Once we have that, we're going to close this. Over to project, export. We're going to click add. We're going to go to web, and then we're going to export project. You can of course configure this how you need to. Click export project, and you just want to choose where you want to export this to. I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to call this exports. I'm just going to save it into the exports folder. Then we're going to open up a Explorer tab because we now need to go in there. At this point, we've exported the game. That part's done. We just have to go find that folder, which in my case is inside of Godot, inside of the Rails hosting, video, and then the exports folder right here. I'm going to minimize Godot. And we're just going to grab this. And inside of our public folder, we're going to drag in the exports folder. Just drag it in like that. It'll take a second because it has to copy over files and it's going into WSL in my case. Once we have this though, I'm going to hit F2 to rename this. I'm going to call this folder game. We have a game. So we go over to bin/dev, click on play game, which goes to /game. Right here, /game doesn't work for us. My bad. We don't want this to be game. I'm looking at this and I'm like, why isn't this working? We need to come in here because we're using the Soulslike template. I even said this earlier. We need to actually redirect to the game/Soulslike template.html. We need this to match the HTML file that gets put in here when we export with Godot. This file right here. We're going to save this, refresh. Now if we click on this, it'll take us here and it'll tell us, hey, you're missing some features. For this, we need to add some header files. So we come to our config, environments, development.rb. In development.rb, we want to add some header files, which we can do at the top here. It's actually really easy to do. Just do config.publicfileserver.headers, and then you add these two header files. Because we're doing this in development, we also want to do this in production. In production, we'll do the same thing right here. Now, generally, you want to test this in development before you do it, but I already know that this is going to work. So, because we added these to our environment, we actually have to stop the server and start it again. We can come over here and we can refresh. You'll see nothing changes when I refresh. Unfortunately, what we have to do is we have to open up our web dev tools, right-click on the refresh button, and empty cache and reload. That'll cause this to actually work. But now I'm going to refresh again because it's going to resize the page, and everything's going to crash. That's because I'm using Brave. Which is, that one's on me, really. It's not on you. I am going to mute this because I really don't want to listen to the audio that plays. But if we give this a second, this will open up. Here's our game. It's running locally. Everything works just fine. Let's open up the campfire, which is a sonic ring for some reason. Cool. Now that that's done, we've also finished our deploy. If we go over to our website, this will work out of the box for us to some extent. Now, in your case, you'll probably have to configure this a different way. So if you come over to Cloudflare, because you're using SSL, you're gonna have to come into the DNS. Make sure you're pointing to your new IP address. right here. So that's 104. Say I want to edit this. I want this to be 104. Enter. That'll now update our server to, or our domain name to point to that server. But now we have to come into SSL. In overview, we want to make sure that our SSL encryption mode is set to full. And then under, I think, Edge certificates, we want to scroll down and we want to make sure always use HTTPS is checked. And you probably want to make sure like automatic HTTPS rewrites are checked. Once you have all that, you can go over to deanout.com. You'll see the connection timed out for me. If I run this now, you see the homepage, but it's not the version we have in development, right? So how do we get the development version? Well, that's because this was done. We did all of those changes to development while this was deploying. So now let's just, instead of running Kamal setup, let's run Kamal deploy. Go ahead and run this. This will take on average about 2 minutes. Okay, and then we can see it took 211 seconds. I'm going to come over to deanout.com, and there you go. Everything's just like you saw in the demo. You can log in with the admin user with admin@example.com and a password of password. Maybe I don't like that password, so I come into edit profile, change the password to, I don't know, password 123, password 123, and then I have to type in my old password, and I click update. Again, the styling for the forms isn't there, but you get the idea. We can then come over to our dev blog, post something if we want to, new post, test case, we'll attach an image, then we'll scroll down and we'll grab a picture of Percy. Wait a second for it to upload, click create post. There we go. We now have the post itself with the information attached. Let's come back to the home page, click play our game. I am going to mute this again because I don't like listening to this. There you go. We have our Soulslike game running on our server. Anytime you want to make a change, the only thing you have to do, if I go back to the home page, is, let me stop this because we don't need to run this locally, a Kamal deploy. Sometimes maybe you want to do more, you do a setup. If you run into an error where your Kamal lock is still there, let's say I do a Kamal deploy, I wait for it to acquire the lock, takes a second, and then I hit Control C. Now, if I try to do another Kamal deploy, it won't work because it can't acquire the lock because it thinks the server's still locked. In that case, I can do a Kamal lock release. It'll connect, it'll release that lock, and now I can do a Kamal deploy again. Anytime you want to make a change, you just run this Kamal deploy command. It's that easy. Maybe you've done a whole day's worth of coding, you want to push the next big update, it's just one Kamal deploy away. Do a change to your Godot game, throw it into your public folder, export it in here, and then do the same thing. That's it. You now have an open source game engine running on an open source framework being deployed with an open source gem to wherever you want to. You don't even have to use DigitalOcean if you don't want to. You can use Hetzner, you can use any other server. You really just need a Linux server with an IP address, point Cloudflare to it, make sure it has SSL enabled, then you're good to go. That's going to do it for this video. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Again, we recorded all of this over on Twitch. Find me at twitch.tv/deanout, same as the domain name I used. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one.